On a frozen February night in 1978, 72-year-old Martha Washington did something everyone said was crazy. While her neighbors locked their doors and hid inside, she opened hers to 9 freezing strangers, members of the Hells Angels motorcycle club, men covered in leather and tattoos, men the world had taught her to fear. What happened next changed 9 lives forever. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. The wind howled like a wounded animal outside Martha Washington's small house on the edge of Detroit. It was February 1978, and the blizzard had already dumped 2 feet of snow in less than 6 hours. Martha stood at her kitchen window, her 72-year-old hands wrapped around a mug of hot tea, watching the white chaos swallow everything in sight. The streetlights had gone out an hour ago. The phone lines were dead. She was alone, just as she had been for the past 8 years since Harold passed. But Martha Washington had survived worse than snowstorms. She had survived the Jim Crow South, the race riots of '67, the loss of her youngest son in Vietnam, and the slow, painful death of her husband from lung disease. A little snow wasn't going to break her. Still, at her age, the cold seeped into her bones in ways it never used to. She was about to turn away from the window when she saw them, dark shapes moving through the white curtain of snow. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. But no, there they were. Motorcycles, 9 of them, crawling through the storm like mechanical ghosts. They were barely moving, their riders hunched against the wind, their bikes sliding dangerously on the icy road. Martha watched as one bike went down, then another. The riders struggled to their feet, helping each other, but it was clear they were in serious trouble. The temperature had to be well below 0 with the wind chill. No one could survive long out there, especially not dressed in leather jackets that offered little protection against this kind of cold. She saw one of them pointing toward houses along the street. They were looking for shelter. Most of her neighbors had already evacuated to the warming center downtown before the worst of the storm hit. Martha had refused to go. This was her home. She wasn't leaving it for anyone or anything. The bikers were getting closer now, and she could see them more clearly. Big men, all of them, with long hair and beards crusted with ice. Their leather vests bore patches she recognized from the news. Hells Angels, the motorcycle club everyone feared. The ones the newspapers called criminals and thugs. Martha's daughter Denise, who lived in Chicago, would have told her to lock the doors, turn off the lights, and pretend she wasn't home. Her son, Marcus, would have called the police, if the phones were working. But Martha Washington hadn't lived 72 years by being afraid of people who looked different from what society expected. She watched as they struggled past her house, heading further down the street where all the homes stood dark and empty. They were going to freeze to death looking for shelter that wasn't there. Martha knew what happened to people caught in blizzards like this. She had seen it before during the Great Storm of '50. Bodies found days later, frozen solid, sometimes just yards from safety. She made her decision in less than 10 seconds. Martha unlocked her front door and stepped out onto her porch. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. She waved her arms, shouting into the wind, "Here! Come here!" At first, she didn't think they heard her. They kept moving, their bikes weaving dangerously. But then one of them looked back. He stopped, raising his hand to the others. They all stopped, turning their frost-covered faces toward her. For a moment, nobody moved. Martha stood on her porch, this elderly black woman in her quilted housecoat and slippers, beckoning to 9 members of one of America's most notorious motorcycle clubs. They stared at her, and she stared back, refusing to let the cold drive her inside before they made their choice. The first biker killed his engine and dismounted. He was massive, well over 6 feet tall, with a thick black beard that had turned white with ice. He said something to the others, and one by one, they shut off their bikes and started trudging through the deep snow toward her house. Martha held the door open as they approached. The first one reached her porch, and up close, she could see that his lips were blue, his face raw and red from the cold. Ice had formed on his eyebrows and in his beard. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough and barely audible over the wind. "We don't want to intrude, but don't be foolish. Martha cut him off. Get inside before you freeze to death, all of you. She ushered them in, all 9 of these huge, intimidating men, and closed the door behind them. They stood in her small living room, dripping melted snow onto her carpet, looking completely out of place among her doilies and family photographs and the religious paintings on her walls. They were shivering so violently they could barely stand. Their leather jackets, she could see now, were completely inadequate for this kind of weather. Some of them weren't even wearing gloves. Their hands were white and waxy looking. Frostbite, she thought. They had frostbite. Bathrooms down the hall, Martha said briskly, taking command. You need to warm up slowly or you'll do more damage. No hot water yet. Start with lukewarm. You. She pointed to the one who had spoken first. What's your name? Jack, he managed through chattering teeth. Jack Keller. Jack, you help the ones who can't feel their fingers or toes. Get them in the bathroom, run lukewarm water. Not hot. You understand? Lukewarm. The rest of you, out of those wet clothes. I've got blankets and quilts. My late husband's clothes are in the bedroom closet. They won't fit perfect, but they're dry and warm. For a moment, none of them moved. They just stared at her. These hardened bikers who probably weren't used to taking orders from anyone, let alone a 72-year-old grandmother. But Martha had raised 4 children, buried a husband, and taught elementary school for 35 years. She knew how to handle people in crisis. Move, she commanded, and they moved. The next hour was a blur of activity. Martha had them strip off their frozen leather and denim, replacing it with Harold's old clothes, blankets, and every quilt she owned. She made them sit down, refusing to let them fall asleep despite their exhaustion. She knew about hypothermia. Sleep could be deadly. She put water on the stove for tea and soup. Her power was out, but she had a gas stove that still worked. She made them drink warm liquids, slowly at first, then more as their core temperatures came back up. She checked their fingers and toes for frostbite, wrapping the worst cases in dry cloths. One of them, a younger man with long blonde hair, couldn't stop shaking. His lips were still blue even after 30 minutes inside. Martha sat with him, rubbing his arms and back, talking to him constantly to keep him alert. What's your name, son? She asked. Tommy, he stuttered. Tommy Reeves. How old are you, Tommy? 24. You've got a mother somewhere who'd kill me if I let anything happen to you, Martha said firmly. So you're going to be just fine. You hear me? Just fine. Gradually, the shivering lessened. Color returned to their faces. Feeling came back to their extremities, bringing with it the burning pain that meant the tissue was alive and recovering. Martha moved among them like a general commanding troops, checking on each one, redistributing blankets, refilling mugs with warm tea. Jack Keller, who seemed to be their leader, watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Finally, when everyone was stable and the immediate danger had passed, he spoke. Ma'am, I don't know what to say. You saved our lives. Martha waved her hand dismissively. Nonsense, I did what anyone would do. No, another one spoke up, a man with graying hair and a scar across his cheek. No one else opened their door. We passed 20 houses, all dark, all locked up tight. You're the only one who helped. Martha looked around at these 9 men crowded into her small living room, wrapped in her dead husband's clothes and her grandmother's quilts. They looked so different from the terrifying figures she'd seen on the news. Right now they just looked like someone's sons, someone's brothers, someone's husbands perhaps. Human beings who had been in trouble and needed help. Well, she said simply, I couldn't very well let you freeze to death on my doorstep, could I? Outside, the blizzard continued to rage. The wind screamed and howled, throwing snow against the windows in waves. But inside Martha Washington's house, 9 Hell's Angels sat safe and warm, beginning to realize that they owed their lives to a 72-year-old black grandmother who hadn't thought twice about opening her door to strangers. What none of them knew yet was that this night would change all of their lives forever, that the bond formed in this blizzard would last for decades, that Martha Washington would never have to fear anything again as long as these 9 men drew breath. But that part of the story was still to come. For now, as the storm raged outside, Martha Washington did what she always did. She took care of people who needed taking care of. It was simply who she was. Jack Keller watched her refill his mug with hot tea, and he made a decision. He didn't know yet what form it would take, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He and his brothers owed this woman a debt that could never truly be repaid. But they would spend the rest of their lives trying. The blizzard showed no signs of stopping. By midnight, the snow had reached the first-floor windows of Martha's house. The wind had shifted, coming from the north now, driving the temperature even lower. Inside, the house had grown quiet except for the whistle of wind through the eaves and the occasional creak of the old frame settling. Martha had finally sat down in her armchair, the one Harold used to call her throne. Her feet ached and her arthritis was acting up from all the activity. But all 9 men were stable now, warm and recovering. 3 of them had dozed off on her couch and floor, wrapped in quilts. The others sat awake, talking quietly among themselves. Jack Keller pulled a chair close to Martha. "Mrs. Washington," Martha said. "Martha Washington. And yes, I've heard all the jokes about the first president's wife." A slight smile crossed Jack's weathered face. "Mrs. Washington, I need to know. Why did you help us? You had to know who we are. What we are." Martha looked at him steadily. "I saw 9 men about to freeze to death. That's all I needed to know." "Most people see the patches and cross the street," said the man with the scar, who had introduced himself as Razor. "They see criminals. Dangerous men." "Are you?" Martha asked simply. "Dangerous?" The question hung in the air. Jack exchanged glances with Razor, then looked back at Martha. "We can be. We live a hard life, we don't apologize for that. But we have a code. We protect our own, we don't hurt innocent people." "Innocent," Martha repeated softly. "That's an interesting word. Let me tell you something about innocent." She set down her mug and settled back in her chair. "I was born in Alabama in 1906. My father was a sharecropper. Do you know what that means? It means we worked land we didn't own, gave most of what we grew to the man who owned it, and lived in a shack with holes in the walls. I was the youngest of 7 children. Only 4 of us survived to adulthood." The men had gone quiet now, listening. "When I was 15, Martha continued, I watched the Ku Klux Klan burn down the church where my father preached on Sundays. He wasn't even a real preacher. He was just a man who could read the Bible, and that was enough for our community. They burned it because they said black folks were getting too organized, too uppity. My father tried to save the building. They beat him so badly he never walked right again." Tommy, the young blonde man, had tears in his eyes. The others stared at the floor, at their hands, anywhere but at Martha's face. "I came north in 1924, Martha said. I was 18 years old. I had $6 in my pocket and a suitcase held together with rope. I worked as a maid for white families during the day and took classes at night. It took me 9 years to get my teaching certificate. 9 years of cleaning other people's houses, raising other people's children, while I studied by candlelight because we couldn't afford electricity." "Jesus," someone whispered. "I met Harold in 1933. He worked at the Ford plant. We got married in 34, and I finally got my first teaching job in 35. For 35 years, I taught first grade in the Detroit public schools. I taught black children and white children, poor children who came to school hungry, children whose fathers beat them, children whose mothers worked 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. I taught them all to read and write and believe they could be something more than what the world told them they had to be." Martha's voice remained steady, but there was steel in it now. "I raised 4 children. My oldest, Benjamin, died in Vietnam in 1969. He was 23 years old. The Army sent me a flag and a letter saying he died heroically. They didn't tell me he died screaming for his mother in a jungle on the other side of the world, fighting in a war nobody could explain to me. I found that out from his best friend who survived." She paused, taking a sip of her tea. The men sat frozen, transfixed. My daughter Denise became a nurse. She lives in Chicago now with her husband and 3 children. My son Marcus is a postman right here in Detroit. My youngest, Ruth, died of cancer in 1973. She was 32 years old. I held her hand while she died. It took 6 months. Every day I watched her fade away piece by piece. Mrs. Washington, Jack started, but she held up her hand. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, she said firmly. I'm telling you this because you asked me why I helped you. You want to know why an old black woman opened her door to 9 white bikers in the middle of a blizzard? I'll tell you why. Because I've spent my entire life watching people make judgments about other people based on what they look like, where they come from, what patch they wear, what color their skin is. I've spent my entire life being judged before I opened my mouth, being told I couldn't do things because of how I was born. She leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. I've seen real evil in this world. I've seen men burn churches. I've seen police turn fire hoses on children. I've seen good people destroyed by hate and prejudice and fear. And I'll tell you something. Evil doesn't wear a leather jacket or ride a motorcycle. Evil is in the heart. It's in the choices people make. You 9 men were dying out there in that storm. You needed help. I don't care what patches you wear or what you've done in your past. At that moment you needed help and I could give it. That's all that mattered. That's all that ever matters. The room was absolutely silent except for the howling wind outside. Finally, Jack Keller spoke, and his voice was thick with emotion. Ma'am, I don't know if you believe in God or fate or just dumb luck, but I believe we ended up on your street for a reason tonight. And I swear to you, right here and now, that you will never regret opening that door. I already know that, Martha said simply. One by one, the other men spoke up, introducing themselves properly now. There was Razor, whose real name was Robert Torres. He'd gotten his nickname not from violence, as Martha might have assumed, but from his previous job as a barber. There was Bear, a massive man with gentle eyes whose real name was William Hunt. There was Preacher, called that because he never cursed. His real name was James Cotton. There was Tiny, ironically the second largest man in the group, real name Michael Davidson. There was Spider, tall and thin, whose real name was Christopher Black. There was Mongo, built like a tank, real name Dale Morrison. There was Red, with his rust-colored beard, real name Patrick Sullivan. And there was Tommy Reeves, the youngest, who still looked like a scared kid, despite the leather and patches. As the night wore on, and the storm continued its assault, they talked. The men told her about their lives, the broken homes many had come from, the wars some had fought in, the reasons they'd joined the club. They spoke of brotherhood, of loyalty, of finding family where blood ties had failed them. Jack had served 2 tours in Vietnam. Bear's father had beaten him for years until he was big enough to fight back. Spider had grown up in foster care, moving from home to home until he aged out of the system at 18. Martha listened to all of it without judgment, nodding occasionally, asking questions that showed she was really hearing them. She'd spent decades listening to children tell her about their difficult lives. These were just bigger children, she thought, still carrying their wounds, still looking for a place to belong. Around 3 a.m, the power suddenly came back on. The lights blazed to life, and the furnace rumbled awake. Everyone cheered quietly, not wanting to wake the sleeping men. Well, Martha said, pushing herself up from her chair, now that we have heat and light, I can make you all a proper meal. I imagine you're hungry. Mrs. Washington, you should rest, Jack protested. You've done enough. Nonsense, Martha said, waving him off. I slept all day yesterday because I knew the storm was coming. I'm fine. Besides, I have 9 grown men in my house. Someone has to feed you. She went to her kitchen and started pulling out ingredients. Within minutes, she had flour, eggs, and buttermilk on the counter. She was going to make biscuits from scratch, the way her mother had taught her in Alabama more than 60 years ago. Jack followed her into the kitchen. At least let me help. Martha looked at him skeptically. Do you know how to cook? My mother taught me before she died. I was 12. Had to take care of my younger sisters after that. Martha studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, you can help, but you do it my way." "Yes, ma'am," Jack said, and the slight smile on his face made him look years younger. They worked together in the kitchen, and slowly the others drifted in to help or just to watch. Martha directed them like she used to direct her first graders, firmly but kindly, accepting no nonsense but plenty of laughter. Bear turned out to have a talent for scrambling eggs. Razor could slice vegetables with impressive precision. Preacher knew how to make coffee that didn't taste like mud. By 4:30 in the morning, Martha Washington's small dining table was laden with biscuits and gravy, scrambled eggs, fried potatoes, sliced tomatoes, and fresh coffee. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling and made with care. The men who had been sleeping were gently woken up. All 9 of them crowded around Martha's table, squeezing into chairs and sitting on the floor with plates in their laps. Before they ate, Martha bowed her head. "Lord," she said quietly, "thank you for keeping us safe through this storm. Thank you for bringing these men to my door before it was too late. Bless this food and bless the hands that prepared it. And please watch over all the other people out there tonight who aren't as fortunate as we are. Amen." "Amen," the 9 bikers echoed, and there wasn't a trace of mockery or discomfort in any of their voices. They ate like men who hadn't seen food in days, praising every bite. Martha watched them with satisfaction. This was what she'd always done best, taking care of people, making them feel seen and valued and safe. It didn't matter who they were or where they came from. As dawn began to break and the storm finally started to ease, Jack Keller stood up. "Brothers," he said formally, "I think we need to make something official." The others put down their plates and gave him their full attention. Mrs. Martha Washington opened her door when no one else would. She didn't know us. She had every reason to be afraid. But she saw men in need and she helped. She didn't just save our lives, she fed us, clothed us, and treated us with more kindness and respect than most of us have known in years. Heads nodded around the room. "In the club, we take care of our own," Jack continued. "We protect our brothers and their families. We have a code. Today, right now, I'm proposing that we extend that protection to Mrs. Washington, that we make it official, that from this day forward, she is under the protection of this charter. Anyone who threatens her, threatens us. Anyone who helps her, helps us. We're here for her, for whatever she needs, for as long as we live." One by one, the 8 other men stood up. "Agreed," said Razor. "Agreed," said Bear, then Preacher, Tiny, Spider, Mongo, Red, and finally young Tommy, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. "It's unanimous then," Jack said. He turned to Martha, who had tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Mrs. Washington, you saved 9 lives tonight. We can never repay that. But we swear to you, on our honor and our lives, that you will never have to face anything alone again. You call us. We come. You need us. We're there. This isn't charity, this isn't pity, this is family." Martha couldn't speak. She could only nod as these 9 rough, hard men, these Hell's Angels who society said were criminals and thugs, stood in her small dining room and swore an oath to protect her forever. Outside, the storm was ending, the sky was lightening, but inside Martha Washington's house, something much more powerful than a blizzard had taken place. A bond had been forged that would prove to be unbreakable, lasting far longer than any of them could have imagined that morning. But the true test of that bond was still to come. 3 weeks after the blizzard, Martha was in her front yard trying to shovel the walkway. The city plows had finally come through, but they'd left a wall of heavy, icy snow at the end of her driveway. She'd been chipping away at it for 20 minutes, and her back was screaming in protest. The roar of motorcycles made her look up. 9 bikes turned onto her street, and Martha found herself smiling despite her aching back. They'd been true to their word. In the weeks since that night, at least 1 or 2 of them had stopped by every few days to check on her to see if she needed anything. But today all 9 had come. They pulled up in front of her house, and Jack was off his bike before the engine died. "Mrs. Washington, what are you doing?" he said, his tone almost scolding. You shouldn't be out here doing this. Well, somebody has to, Martha said, wiping her forehead. The city doesn't care about old folks in small houses. That's why we're here, Bear said, already grabbing the shovel from her hands. We've got this. You go inside where it's warm. Within minutes, all 9 men were working on her yard. They cleared the driveway, the walkway, the steps, and even started on her elderly neighbor's yard next door. Mrs. Chen, a tiny Chinese woman in her 80s, came out on her porch and stared in amazement at the sight of 9 Hell's Angels shoveling her snow. Martha walked over to her. They're good boys, she said simply. Mrs. Chen looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Good boys? Martha, those are Hell's Angels. I know exactly who they are, Martha said firmly. And I'm telling you, they're good boys. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Within a week, Martha Washington's association with the Hell's Angels became the talk of the community. Some people were scandalized, others were frightened. But Martha didn't care. She knew what she knew, and no amount of gossip was going to change her mind. Her daughter Denise called from Chicago, her voice tight with worry. Mama, people are saying you have bikers coming to your house. What's going on? Martha explained the story of the blizzard, the oath, everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mama, I don't think this is safe. These are criminals. They're dangerous people. Have you met them? Martha asked. Of course not. Then don't tell me who they are, Martha said, her voice sharp. I know them. You don't. And I'll thank you to trust my judgment. I've been making good decisions for 72 years. Denise sputtered, but Martha was unmoved. She'd raised that girl, loved her dearly, but she wasn't going to let anyone, not even her own daughter, make her feel ashamed of helping people who needed help and who had proven themselves worthy of her trust. The real test came 2 months after the blizzard. Martha was at the grocery store pushing her cart slowly down the canned goods aisle. Her arthritis was bad that day, making every movement painful. She was reaching for a can of soup when she felt someone grab her purse. It happened so fast. A young man, couldn't have been more than 20, yanked her purse right off her shoulder. The force of it spun her around and sent her crashing into the shelves. Cans clattered to the floor. Martha cried out in pain as she fell, her hip hitting the hard linoleum. The thief ran for the exit, but he didn't get far. Bear happened to be in the store buying motor oil. He saw the whole thing. The young man ran right past him, and Bear simply stuck out one massive arm. It was like running into a tree trunk. The thief went down hard. Within seconds, Bear had him pinned to the floor with one hand while he helped Martha up with the other. You okay, Mrs. Washington? I think so, Martha said, wincing. Her hip hurt terribly, and she could feel a bruise forming already. The store manager came running over, followed by several customers. The thief was cursing and struggling, but he couldn't move with Bear's weight holding him down. Someone had called the police. You know this man? The manager asked Bear, looking nervous. This is Mrs. Martha Washington, Bear said firmly. She's under our protection. This punk just made the worst mistake of his life. The way he said, our protection, made it clear what he meant. The manager went pale. Even the thief stopped struggling, suddenly realizing who he'd just robbed. When the police arrived, they found a very different scene than they might have expected. Bear had the thief secured, but unharmed. Martha was sitting in a chair the manager had brought over, and several customers were fussing over her. The police took statements, arrested the thief, and returned Martha's purse. One of the officers, a black man in his 40s, pulled Martha aside. Mrs. Washington, I recognize you. You taught my older sister. Mrs. Washington, these bikers, are you okay? Are they bothering you? Martha smiled. Officer, these men are my friends. That young man over there just protected me. I'm fine. Better than fine. The officer looked uncertain but nodded. If you say so, ma'am. But if you ever need anything, I know where the police station is, Martha assured him. But I promise you, I'm in good hands. After the police left, Bear insisted on driving Martha home. He put her groceries in the saddlebag of his bike and helped her into his pickup truck. because of course bikers didn't just have motorcycles. He called the other brothers on the way, and by the time they reached Martha's house, 5 more bikes were pulling up. They helped her inside, checked her over for injuries, and insisted on staying until they were sure she was all right. Tommy went out and filled her prescriptions. Razor fixed a loose board on her back porch that had been bothering her for weeks. Spider changed the light bulbs she couldn't reach. Jack sat with her in the living room, his face serious. "Mrs. Washington, I need you to understand something. Word is going to spread about what happened today. People are going to know that you're protected. That's good. It means no one else will be stupid enough to try something. But it also means people are going to talk. Are you ready for that?" Martha thought about her daughter's worried phone calls, about the way some of her neighbors had already started treating her differently. Then she thought about these men who had shown her nothing but respect and gratitude, who had kept their word in every way. "Let them talk," she said firmly. "I know the truth. That's all that matters." Jack nodded slowly. "You're something special, Mrs. Washington, you know that?" "I'm just an old woman who helped some people in a snowstorm," Martha said. "The special thing is that you boys remembered. Most people forget kindness the minute it's convenient to do so." Over the next several months, the relationship deepened in ways none of them had anticipated. Martha started keeping a calendar on her refrigerator with everyone's birthdays marked. She baked Bear a chocolate cake for his 35th birthday. She found out that Tommy's mother had died when he was young, and she made sure to call him on Mother's Day to tell him she was proud of him. When Preacher's wife had a baby, Martha was one of the first visitors at the hospital. She brought a quilt she'd made herself, and she held that tiny baby girl with tears streaming down her face. "Beautiful," she whispered. "Just beautiful." Preacher looked at Jack, and something passed between them. This wasn't just about repaying a debt anymore. This had become real. Martha Washington wasn't just someone they protected, she was family. The bikers started bringing their problems to her. Razor was having trouble with his teenage daughter. Martha gave him advice that actually worked. Mongo was drinking too much. Martha sat with him for hours, talking about his demons, never judging, just listening and offering the kind of wisdom that only comes from living through hardship and coming out the other side. Martha's son Marcus was initially horrified by his mother's new friends, but Martha insisted he meet them. She invited Jack and Preacher to Sunday dinner. Marcus came with his wife and children, prepared to hate these men, prepared to rescue his mother from what he was sure was a dangerous situation. Instead, he watched Jack help his mother in the kitchen without being asked. He watched Preacher play gently with Marcus's 7-year-old daughter, letting her style his long beard while he sat perfectly still and patient. He watched these supposedly dangerous criminals treat his elderly mother with a level of respect and affection that moved him deeply. By the end of the evening, Marcus pulled his mother aside. "Mama, I was wrong. I'm sorry I doubted you. You were protecting me," Martha said, patting his cheek. "I can't fault you for that. But now you see, they're good men who've had hard lives. They just needed someone to see past the leather and the patches to the people underneath." Not everyone in Martha's life was as understanding. Some of her friends from church stopped calling. A few neighbors crossed the street when they saw her coming. It hurt, but Martha held her head high. She'd faced worse prejudice in her life, survived worse rejection. If people wanted to judge her based on who her friends were, that said more about them than it did about her. But there were also unexpected supporters. Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor, started leaving plates of homemade dumplings on Martha's porch with notes that said, "For you and your boys." The young officer who had responded to the robbery started waving when he saw Martha, no longer concerned about her welfare. Even the pastor at Martha's church, after initial skepticism, came around after Jack and 3 others showed up to help rebuild the church basement after a pipe burst, refusing to take a penny for their labor. "Mrs. Washington," the pastor said afterward, watching the bikers load their tools back into their trucks, "I believe God works in mysterious ways. I think he sent you to those men as much as he sent them to you." Martha smiled. "I think you might be right, Pastor." One evening in late summer, all 9 men were at Martha's house for what had become their monthly Sunday dinner. They were crowded around her dining table and spilling into the living room, eating pot roast and mashed potatoes and green beans from her garden. The conversation was loud and full of laughter. Martha looked around at these men, these rough, tattooed, leather-wearing men who society feared, and she felt a surge of love so strong it almost overwhelmed her. They'd become the sons she needed after Benjamin died in Vietnam. They'd become the family that showed up, that stayed, that cared. Jack caught her eye and smiled, raising his glass of sweet tea. "To Mrs. Washington," he said, and immediately everyone quieted down, raising their own glasses. "To the woman who saved our lives and then showed us what real family means," Jack continued. "We came to your door, strangers. You made us brothers. We will never forget that. We will never stop being grateful. And we will never, ever let you down." "Never," the others echoed. And Martha saw the fierce loyalty in every face, the absolute certainty of their commitment. But loyalty, as Martha would soon learn, sometimes demands more than any of them expected. The true test of their bond was about to arrive, and it would challenge everything they believed about family, justice, and how far you go to protect someone you love. It was October of 1979, nearly 2 years after the blizzard, when Martha received the phone call that would change everything. She was in her kitchen making apple butter from fruit that Razor had brought from his sister's orchard when the phone rang. "Mama." It was Denise, and her voice was shaking. "Mama, you need to sit down." Martha felt her heart seize in her chest. "What's wrong? Is it one of the grandchildren?" "No, Mama, it's Marcus. There's been an accident." The world tilted. Martha gripped the counter to steady herself. "What kind of accident?" "He was on his mail route. A car ran a red light." "Mama, he's in critical condition at Detroit General. They don't know if he's going to make it." Martha didn't remember hanging up the phone. She didn't remember grabbing her coat. The next thing she knew, she was standing on her front porch in a daze, tears streaming down her face, not sure how to get to the hospital, not even sure if her legs would carry her there. A motorcycle pulled up. It was Tommy. He took one look at her face and was off his bike in an instant. "Mrs. Washington, what's wrong?" The words tumbled out. Tommy didn't hesitate. "I'm taking you to the hospital right now." "Can you ride on the back of my bike?" "I don't know," Martha said, but Tommy was already helping her on, showing her where to put her feet, telling her to hold on tight. He called Jack on his radio, gave him the brief details, and then they were moving. Martha had never been on a motorcycle before. She held on to Tommy for dear life as he wove through traffic, getting her to Detroit General in half the time it would have taken by car. By the time they arrived, 3 more bikes were already there. Jack, Bear, and Spider had beaten them to the hospital. Jack was waiting at the emergency entrance. He helped Martha off the bike and kept his arm around her as they went inside. "We're here, Mrs. Washington, whatever you need. We're here." The next hours were a blur of waiting rooms and doctors speaking in medical terms Martha could barely understand. Marcus was in surgery. The car had hit him broadside, multiple broken bones. Internal bleeding. Head trauma. The doctors said the next 24 hours would be critical. Denise arrived from Chicago around midnight, her eyes red from crying. She saw the bikers filling the waiting room, because by now, all 9 had shown up. And for a moment, her face hardened. But then she saw how Jack was sitting with Martha, holding her hand, how Bear had gone to get her coffee and food she couldn't eat, how Tommy was pacing the hallway looking as distraught as family. She sat down next to her mother. "Mama, these are my boys," Martha said simply. They came as soon as they heard. Denise looked around at these rough men who had taken over the surgical waiting room. The hospital staff was giving them nervous looks, but none of the bikers were causing any trouble. They were just there, a wall of leather and loyalty surrounding one terrified old woman. "Okay, Mama," Denise said quietly, and she reached over and squeezed Jack's hand. "Thank you for being here." Marcus survived the surgery, but barely. He was in a coma. The doctor said they had to wait and see. Days passed. Martha practically lived at the hospital. The bikers took turns staying with her, making sure she ate, making sure she rested, running interference with hospital staff who tried to enforce visiting hour restrictions. She's his mother, Jack told one particularly officious nurse. She stays as long as she wants. You got a problem with that, you take it up with me. The nurse looked at Jack's size, his patches, the 7 other bikers standing behind him, and decided she didn't have a problem with it after all. A week into Marcus's coma, Martha was sitting by his bedside holding his hand when Jack came in with news. Mrs. Washington, we found out who hit Marcus. Martha looked up. The police said it was a hit and run. It was, but we have connections. People who see things, hear things. The driver was a kid named Derek Mills. 22 years old, he was drunk, ran the red light, hit Marcus and drove away. Left him lying in the street. Martha's hand tightened on Marcus's. Where is this boy now? That's the thing, Jack said, his voice hard. His father is Richard Mills. He owns half the commercial real estate in downtown Detroit. Rich, connected, powerful. The kid turned himself in after 3 days, but Daddy's lawyers got him out on bail. Word is they're going to make this go away. Reduced charges, community service, maybe not even a day in jail. Martha felt something cold and terrible rising in her chest. Her son was lying in a coma, might never wake up, might never be the same even if he did. And the person responsible was going to walk free because his father had money. That's not right, she said, her voice shaking. No, ma'am, it's not, Jack agreed. He hesitated, then said carefully, Mrs. Washington, you know what we are, what we do. If you want, we can make sure justice happens. Real justice. Not the kind you buy with lawyers and money. We can make Derek Mills understand what he did. We can make him pay. Martha understood exactly what Jack was offering. She looked at her son, his head wrapped in bandages, machines breathing for him, his future uncertain. She thought about Benjamin, who never came home from Vietnam. She thought about Ruth, dead from cancer. She thought about all the injustice she'd seen in her life, all the times the powerful crushed the powerless and got away with it. She was so tempted. God help her, she was tempted. But then she looked at Jack, this man who had become like a son to her, and she saw something in his eyes. He was offering to do this for her, but it would cost him something. It would cost all of them something. They would be crossing a line, and once crossed, there was no going back. No, Martha said quietly. Jack looked surprised. Mrs. Washington. No, Martha said more firmly. Jack, I know you're angry. I know you want to help, but I don't want you to do this, not for me. But he deserves. Maybe he does, Martha interrupted. Maybe Derek Mills deserves whatever you're thinking of doing to him. But you don't deserve to carry that weight. None of you do. I won't ask that of you. I won't let you become something you're not, because of what happened to my son. We're already, Jack started to say, but Martha held up her hand. You're good men, she said. I know you've done things you're not proud of. I know you've lived hard lives. But with me, you've been nothing but good. You've been kind and loyal and true. That's who you are now. That's who I know. I won't be the reason you go backward. I won't be the reason you do something that will haunt you for the rest of your lives. Jack's eyes were wet. He hurt you. He hurt Marcus. We can't just let that go. Yes, you can, Martha said gently, because that's what real strength is. Not revenge, not violence. Real strength is choosing to be better than the world expects you to be. You've shown me that strength every day for 2 years. Don't stop now. Jack sat down heavily in the chair next to her. I don't know if I can do that, Mrs. Washington. I don't know if I'm that strong. You are, Martha said, taking his large, calloused hand in her small one. I know you are. All of you are. Over the next week, Martha held firm to that decision even though it broke her heart. Jack told the others what she'd said. There was arguing, shouting, debates that lasted hours. Some of them wanted to ignore her wishes. But Jack, Bear, and Preacher held the line. Mrs. Washington had made her choice and they would respect it, even if it killed them to do so. Instead, They channeled their anger into action of a different kind. They hired a lawyer, one of the best in Detroit, and paid his retainer themselves. They gathered witnesses, statements, evidence. They made sure the press knew about the case, about a rich kid who'd nearly killed a mailman and was getting special treatment because of his father's money. Razor, it turned out, had a cousin who worked at the prosecutor's office. He made sure that office knew the Hells Angels were watching this case very closely. The implication was clear. If justice wasn't served through proper channels, they couldn't guarantee what might happen. The pressure worked. Derek Mills's sweetheart plea deal evaporated. The prosecutor, not wanting to be seen as favoring the rich, actually pursued the case with vigor. It took months, but eventually Derek Mills stood trial for vehicular assault, leaving the scene of an accident, and drunk driving. Martha attended every day of the trial. So did all 9 bikers, sitting in the back of the courtroom in their leather and patches, a silent reminder of who was watching, who cared, who would remember if justice wasn't done. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back, they found Derek Mills guilty on all counts. The judge, looking at the bikers in the back of the courtroom and then at Martha in the front row, sentenced him to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. But it was justice, real justice, achieved the right way. Marcus woke up from his coma 3 weeks into the trial. He had a long recovery ahead of him, physical therapy, cognitive challenges, a limp he would carry for the rest of his life. But he was alive, and he was himself, and that was all Martha had prayed for. The first thing he said when he was coherent enough to understand what had happened was, "Mama, they say some bikers have been here every day. Is that true?" "Yes," Martha said, crying with relief that he was awake, that he was talking. "They're family, Marcus. They're family." Marcus looked at his mother, at the joy and exhaustion in her face, and he understood something he'd never quite grasped before. His mother had found something rare and precious. People who showed up not because they had to, but because they wanted to. People who kept their promises. People who proved, day after day, that love isn't about blood, it's about choice. "Then I'd like to meet them," Marcus said. "Properly, I mean. I'd like to thank them." That evening, Jack and the others came to Marcus's hospital room. It was awkward at first, these rough bikers standing around the bed of a man they'd never met but had fought for anyway. But Marcus extended his hand to each of them, looked them in the eye, and said simply, "Thank you. For everything. For my mother. For me. Thank you." And in that moment, the bond that had been forged in a blizzard 2 years earlier grew even stronger, because they'd been tested, truly tested, and they'd passed. Not by taking revenge or delivering violence, but by choosing the harder path. The right path. By choosing to be the men Martha Washington believed they could be. But there was one more chapter to this story. One final revelation that would show just how deep this loyalty ran and how much these 9 men had truly changed. 5 years passed. It was now 1984, and Martha Washington was 78 years old. Her hair had gone completely white, and she moved slower than she used to, but her mind was sharp and her spirit unbroken. The 9 bikers were still a constant presence in her life, though time had brought changes to all of them. Tommy had gotten married to a sweet girl named Lisa. They had a baby boy they named Harold, after Martha's late husband. Martha cried when they told her. Bear had opened his own motorcycle repair shop, and it was actually succeeding. Razor had reconciled with his daughter, who was now in college studying to be a teacher, inspired, she said, by stories of what her father's friend Mrs. Washington had done for decades. Jack was still the leader, still the one who organized the monthly dinners at Martha's house, still the one who called to check on her every few days. But there was something different about him lately, something Martha couldn't quite put her finger on. He seemed quieter, more thoughtful, as if he was wrestling with something heavy. One Sunday afternoon in April, Jack came to Martha's house alone. This was unusual. Usually at least 2 or 3 of them came together. He sat in Harold's old chair and accepted the sweet tea Martha offered, but he barely touched it. "Mrs. Washington," He finally said, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Martha felt a flutter of concern. "What is it, Jack?" He took a deep breath. "That night, the night of the blizzard, when we ended up on your street, it wasn't an accident." Martha frowned. "What do you mean?" "We had left a club meeting in Warren. We were heading back to Detroit. The storm came up fast, faster than the weather report said it would. We should have pulled over, found shelter earlier. But we didn't. We kept riding, trying to make it home." "That's not a crime, Jack," Martha said gently. "You made a mistake. Young men do foolish things." "That's not what I need to tell you," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. "Mrs. Washington, we passed dozens of houses before we got to yours. All of them were dark and locked up. We were freezing, our bikes were sliding all over, and we were desperate. We tried 5 different houses. We banged on doors. We rang bells. Nobody answered. Either they weren't home or they saw who we were and chose not to open the door." Martha nodded slowly. "I understand. People were afraid. By the time we got to your street, I was ready to break into an empty house," Jack continued. "I told the brothers we needed to find shelter even if we had to force our way in. We weren't going to hurt anyone, but we were going to survive, whatever it took. And then we saw your house, the only house on the whole street with lights on." He paused, staring at his hands. "Bear wanted to pass it by. He said, 'There's an old lady in there. She'll call the cops for sure.' Spider said the same thing, but I was the one who made the call. I said we had to try. One more house. One more chance for someone to help us before we did something we'd regret." Martha was beginning to understand. "Jack, what are you trying to tell me?" "I'm trying to tell you that you didn't just save our lives that night," Jack said, and now tears were running down his weathered cheeks. "You saved our souls. If you hadn't opened that door, we would have broken into one of those empty houses. We would have done what we needed to do to survive. And maybe that doesn't sound like much, but it would have been the beginning of something worse. Once you cross that line, once you start taking what isn't yours even for good reasons, it gets easier to do it again. And again." He looked up at her, his eyes raw with emotion. "I've been thinking about this for years, Mrs. Washington. Thinking about how our whole lives could have gone differently. We could have ended up in prison. We could have hurt someone during a robbery. We could have become the monsters everyone already thought we were. But you opened that door. You didn't see monsters. You saw men who needed help, and that changed everything." Martha felt her own eyes filling with tears. "Jack, let me finish," he said. "Please. Over these past 6 years, you've made us better men. Not just because you saved our lives, but because you showed us who we could be. You trusted us, you believed in us. When I wanted to hurt Derek Mills for what he did to Marcus, you stopped me. You told me I was better than that. And you were right. I am better than that. We all are. But only because you saw it in us first." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "Mrs. Washington, I've made a decision. We all have. Next month, I'm leaving the club. So are Bear, Preacher, and Tommy. We're starting a legitimate business together, a motorcycle repair and custom shop. Bear's been teaching us everything he knows. We've saved money, we've made plans, and we're doing this right. Legal. Clean. The way you'd want us to." Martha's hand flew to her mouth. "Jack, you don't have to." "Yes, we do," Jack said firmly. "Not because you asked us to. Because we want to. Because you showed us there's another way to live. The other 5, Razor, Tiny, Spider, Mongo, and Red, they're staying in the club, but they're making changes too, following rules they used to ignore. Being smarter, being better, because of you." He handed her the envelope. "This is the deed to the shop we're buying. We're calling it Washington's Custom Cycles. We want you to be a partner. Not a financial partner, you don't need to put in any money, but a partner in name. We want everyone to know that this business, this new life we're building, it started with you." Martha opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was indeed a deed, and there on the paperwork was her name, Martha Washington, partner. She couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. "You gave us a second chance when nobody else would," Jack said softly. "Now we're taking it. We're becoming the men you always believed we were. And we wanted you to know. We wanted you to be part of it." Martha stood up and walked over to Jack. This big, tough biker who had once been willing to break into houses to survive stood up as well. Martha reached up and put her small, wrinkled hands on either side of his bearded face. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "I'm so proud of all of you." Jack Keller, leader of 9 Hells Angels, survivor of 2 tours in Vietnam, a man who had seen and done things that would haunt him forever, broke down and cried in Martha Washington's living room. He sobbed like a child, and Martha held him the way she'd held her own sons when they were hurting, patting his back and murmuring that it was okay, that everything was going to be okay. When he finally composed himself, Jack wiped his eyes and laughed shakily. "I didn't come here to fall apart like this." "Sometimes falling apart is the bravest thing you can do," Martha said. "It means you're finally letting go of the armor you've been carrying all these years." Over the next months, Martha watched as Jack, Bear, Preacher, and Tommy built their business from the ground up. She attended the grand opening of Washington's Custom Cycles, and she stood by the door greeting every customer, telling them about her boys and their excellent work. The shop became successful beyond anyone's expectations, partly because the work was exceptional, but mostly because of the story behind it, the story of redemption and second chances, and the power of one woman's kindness. The other 5 remained in the club, but true to Jack's word, they had changed. They became known for following the rules, for keeping their heads down, for doing things right. Razor eventually became a mentor to younger club members, teaching them that there was a difference between being tough and being stupid. Spider went back to school and got his GED. Mongo stopped drinking and became one of the most reliable members of his charter. Martha's health began to decline in 1986. She was 80 years old, and her body was finally showing the wear of 8 decades of living. Her heart was weak. Her arthritis made every movement painful. But her mind remained sharp, and her spirit remained strong. When she had to move to a nursing home, she simply couldn't manage on her own anymore. All 9 men helped pack up her house. They moved her into the nicest facility in Detroit, and they paid the difference between what her insurance covered and what the best care cost. They took turns visiting her every single day. They brought her flowers, books, her favorite foods. They made sure the staff treated her well, and the few times a nurse was short with her, a quiet word from Bear or Jack ensured it never happened again. Martha's room became known as the most popular in the nursing home. The other residents were fascinated by her visitors. These bikers who came faithfully, who called her Mama, who treated her with such obvious devotion. Martha told her story to anyone who would listen. The story of a blizzard, 9 freezing men, and a choice to open a door when everyone else had locked theirs. On Martha's 82nd birthday, all 9 men came to the nursing home with a surprise. They wheeled in a motorcycle, one they'd built themselves at Washington's Custom Cycles. It was beautiful, painted in deep purple with gold accents, Martha's favorite colors. "We know you can't ride it," Jack said with a grin. "But we wanted you to have it anyway. It's one of a kind. Just like you." Martha laughed until tears ran down her face. "You boys are crazy. What am I going to do with a motorcycle in a nursing home?" "We'll keep it at the shop," Bear said. "In the place of honor. And on the side, we've painted your name. Martha Washington, the woman who saved 9 lives and changed them forever." Martha Washington passed away peacefully in her sleep on a cold January night in 1989. She was 82 years old. She died with a smile on her face, surrounded by photographs of her children, grandchildren, and 9 rough tattooed bikers who had become her sons. Her funeral was unlike anything Detroit had ever seen. The church was packed to overflowing. Her daughter Denise was there with her family. Her son Marcus, still limping from his long-ago accident, was there with his wife and children. Former students came, some of them now middle-aged with children of their own, to pay respect to the teacher who had believed in them. And outside the church, lining both sides of the street for 3 blocks, stood over 200 Hells Angels, from chapters all across Michigan, They stood at attention in their leather and patches, heads bowed as the hearse passed. It was their tribute to the woman who had proven that humanity wasn't about what you wore or where you came from. It was about what you chose to do when someone needed help. Jack, Bear, Preacher, Tommy, Razor, Tiny, Spider, Mongo, and Red served as pallbearers. They carried her casket with tears streaming down their faces. These 9 men who had been saved by her kindness and transformed by her belief in them. At the graveside, Jack gave a eulogy. His voice was steady, though his eyes were wet. Martha Washington opened her door to 9 strangers on the worst night of our lives. She didn't know us. She had every reason to be afraid, but she saw past our patches and our leather to the human beings underneath. She saved our lives that night, but she didn't stop there. She saved our futures. She saved our souls. She showed us that we could be more than what the world told us we had to be. He paused, looking at the casket covered in purple and gold flowers. We made her a promise that night. We promised to protect her for as long as we lived. We kept that promise. But what she never knew, what we never told her, was that she protected us too. She protected us from becoming the worst versions of ourselves. She protected us from giving up on the possibility of redemption. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, the deed to Washington's Custom Cycles. This business has been successful because it was built on the foundation she gave us. The foundation of second chances, of hard work, of doing things right. Today we're making a decision. 50% of the profits from Washington's Custom Cycles will go into a scholarship fund, the Martha Washington Scholarship for At-Risk Youth. Because she spent her life believing in people everyone else had given up on, we're going to make sure that legacy continues. Years later, that scholarship would send dozens of young people to college. Young people from rough backgrounds, from broken homes, from the wrong side of town. Young people who just needed someone to believe in them the way Martha Washington had believed in 9 freezing bikers on a February night in 1978. Jack Keller lived until 2015. He was 79 years old when he died, surrounded by his wife, his children, his grandchildren, and 8 of his brothers: Tommy, Bear, Preacher, Razor, Tiny, Spider, Mongo, and Red. Spider had passed away in 2003, but the other 8 had remained close, bound by a shared history that had shaped all of their lives. Jack's last words were about Martha. "Tell her we kept our promise." He whispered, "Tell her we became the men she knew we could be." And they had. Washington's Custom Cycles was now one of the most respected motorcycle shops in the Midwest, run by Jack's son and Tommy's daughter. The scholarship fund had helped over 300 students. Bear had become a mentor to troubled youth, speaking at schools about second chances. Preacher had actually become a real preacher, leading a small church that welcomed everyone, especially those who felt unwelcome everywhere else. The story of Martha Washington and the 9 Hells Angels became legend in Detroit. Newspapers wrote about it. A local filmmaker made a documentary. But the real story wasn't about dramatic rescues or violent confrontations. It was about something much simpler and much more profound. It was about the power of seeing people, really seeing them, beyond their exteriors to their essential humanity. It was about the courage it takes to open your door when everyone else has locked theirs. It was about the difference one person can make by choosing kindness over fear, trust over suspicion, hope over cynicism. Martha Washington had helped 9 Hells Angels in a blizzard. And in doing so, she proved that family isn't about blood, protection isn't about violence, and strength isn't about intimidation. Real family is about showing up. Real protection is about guiding people to be better. Real strength is about choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. Those 9 men had sworn to protect Martha forever. But in the end, it was Martha who protected them, from their own worst impulses, from a world that wanted to define them by their mistakes, from the despair of believing they could never be anything more than what they'd always been. She opened her door on one cold February night, and in doing so, she changed 9 lives, and through them, hundreds more. She proved that redemption is real, that people can change, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe in someone when they've stopped believing in themselves. That was the real miracle of Martha Washington. Not that she saved 9 lives in a blizzard, but that she kept on saving them every day after by never letting them forget that they were worth saving. And that, in the end, is the greatest gift one human being can give another. The unwavering belief that they are capable of becoming their best selves, no matter how dark their past or how uncertain their future. Martha Washington gave that gift to 9 men who needed it desperately, and they honored that gift by living lives that would have made her proud. The blizzard ended long ago, but the warmth of what began that night endures, passed down through generations, a testimony to the transformative power of one person's courage, compassion, and unshakable faith in the possibility of redemption. Martha Washington's story reminds us that one act of courage can change lives forever. She didn't see danger that frozen night. She saw human beings who needed help, and in choosing compassion over fear, she transformed 9 lives and created a legacy that endures. Every day we face our own doors, our own chances to choose kindness over judgment. What will you choose when your moment comes? If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe that second chances are real and that people can change. Thank you for listening.